Hello, my name's Jade and today I will be discussing the books I read in 2022, my 2022 wrap up, if you will. Statistics, my favourites, my least favourites. I make this video every year. I've been making it for a few years now. I don't actually remember when the first year I did it was, but I'll link all of my previous year's videos down below. Let's start with Goodreads and like the stats and the numbers. I read 100 books in 2022. I was not anticipating this. It wasn't necessarily like a goal of mine to read 100 books. I think my Goodreads goal was like 60. I managed to read just over 100 books last year. It wasn't until like November, December that I noticed that I was pretty close to reading 100 books anyway. Then I was like, well, now I have to try and get to 100. And I did. I got to 100. Huzzah. Not that like it necessarily matters how much you read. Like I don't know why 100 books is like this big goal. I just like reading a lot because I like getting through books quickly and obtaining as much, like I got a big TBR. I like getting through them quickly and reading as big a variety as I can. I think this was a pretty varied year. Goodreads is telling me that that's 28,285 pages. The shortest book I read this year was Orgy by Caitlin Greenidge. The longest book I read this year was House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J Maas. I actually forgot that I read that this year. Yeah, no surprise, Sarah writes long books. The average book length was 282. I suppose that's probably because of all the graphic novels and like short stories I read, like bringing it down. In terms of the books I read, they didn't feel that short. The most shelved book was Verity by Colleen Hoover. Who's surprised? And the least read book was Junket by Lauren Roth. Average rating for the year was 3.8. I still don't like the star system. It still stresses me out. The highest rated was Natalie Haynes Stands Up for the Classics, which is technically like a radio show slash podcast. You can listen to it on Audible, so I counted it with 4.67 average stars. Highly deserved. It's amazing. If you have any interest in Greek myth or ancient history, I highly recommend listening to it. First book I read this year was Venus and Aphrodite by Bethany Hughes, Fitting Themes. That feels like so long ago. It feels so long ago that I read that. I remember it so vividly though. Last book that I read, Saga Volume 10. Going back to like Venus and Aphrodite, the beginning of this year, like the first 3 months, I want to say, I did such good reading in those months. Like I really enjoyed the majority of the books I read. I really liked the genres I was reading in. I was pretty stressed out. I was in that trying to find a job out of uni period. I turned to books fully as like escapism, comfort. Whenever I had a spare second, that's what I was doing a lot of the time, and they really helped me. And a lot of those books, I don't know if it's because of I was stressed out and I was transitioning, or if they're just really good books, but I remember them so well, and they've like I think about them so often still. And then I feel like the summer got a little wonky. Then we picked up in October, September, November, December. I read some good stuff at the end of the year. Continuing on with the theme of the trends and the stuff I noticed from this last year, I rewatched my 2022 books I want to read and like my wrap up from last year to see how many of the books I wanted to read did I read, and I read some of them. Circe was a really big one. I'd owned it for quite a while. The Song of Achilles is one of my absolute most favorite books. In my mind, The Song of Achilles is flawless, and so I felt super guilty that I hadn't got around to Circe yet. Relief. I didn't like it as much as I like The Song of Achilles, and I think that's one of the reasons why I was so daunted to read it, because I didn't want to love it more than I love The Song of Achilles. I also didn't want to really not like it either. I enjoyed it. I think it's well done. I think it might improve with a reread. Strange the Dreamer. I finally read Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. That was another one that had been sitting so heavy on my mind. Circe, Strange the Dreamer, The Starless Sea, like I'd owned for a really long time, and I had been really anticipated by me, and I hadn't read them yet, and to have read all 3 of them now feels like such a relief. I also talked about how I wanted to read the new Skullduggery Pleasant phase 2 of the Skullduggery Pleasant series, and I've read them all. They are here. I have completed that series. Again, I read them in the beginning of the year, so I completely forgot about them. It felt like so long ago. I read a lot more non-fiction this year than I normally would. I think I read 10 non-fiction books, and considering before this year I would read it only for school, or if it was like a writing craft research for my novel type situation. I didn't really read non-fiction for fun. I read just 10 books because I wanted to, non-fiction this year. I'm super excited to have this like avenue open to me and to keep reading non-fiction. It was a pretty good bunch. There were a couple that were a bit iffy, but for the most part, I think I really enjoyed, if not loved, the vast majority of them. Let's see. Love, yeah. Love, yeah. Love. Like, yeah, only 2 of them I'm kind of a bit like, on. I also read 2 classics this year, and I think this might be a goal for next year. I want to read a few more classics. To be fair, the 2 that I read in 2022 as well were both novellas. A Christmas Carol and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Neither of them were particularly long. And I also read 4 short stories, which, again, I read some during my degrees, but since then, since no one's like making me read them, I don't tend to read them very often. Let's talk about this series. I've already kind of dipped into it with Scott's Very Pleasant. I read the whole of phase 2 of Scott's Very Pleasant. It was really, really good. My favourite, I think, is either Bedlam or Until the End or Dead or Alive. I think it's Until the End or Dead or Alive or Bedlam. I really enjoyed all 3 of those. And I actually went to a signing for Until the End, me and my sister. And that was the first ever book I'd had like signed in person, and it was so exciting, and I'm so glad it was a skullduggery book, and I got to do it with my sister, and it was amazing. 6 books that I started and finished a whole series. That's not too bad. The rest of them, they're less hopeful, I'm afraid. Start with graphic novels because that's the way I have it listed down here. I finished Giant Days. I read the first 9 volumes of this last year, and the last, what, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I think also like a couple of the spin-offy ones this year. This is the last volume. I finished it. Love this series. I read, oh, it's heavy. I read the first 3 volumes of Lore Olympus. I read the first one back in March, and then the second one over the summer, I think. And I just read the last one in December. I'm really enjoying this series. I didn't know how to feel about it in the first one, but with each volume I get more attached, and I'm so excited to see where it goes. And then, as I talked about extensively in my December wrap-up, Saga! I had read the first 4 volumes previously to this year, and there was obviously the hiatus, and so I wanted to wait and marathon them all properly, and I did that in December. So phenomenally good. I also started another graphic novel series, The Sandman by Neil Gaiman. I started first volume, Preludes and Nocturnes, in August. I read that the TV show spanned the first 2 volumes, so I bought the first 2 volumes ready. Come December, I'd only read half of the first volume. I'd only read 4 issues. Something about it. So then I started a few series. I started the Defy the Night. I think it's gonna be a trilogy. I hoped it was a duology, but I think it's gonna be a trilogy. I read The Atlas 6. That's gonna be a trilogy. Dangerous Remedy by Hat Dunn. That is a trilogy. All 3 books are out. And Book of Night by Holly Black. And that one's gonna be a duology. I did continue on with some series like House of Sky and Breath. That's the second book of the series. I read Dune Messiah. I read Dune last year. It looks like it's going to be a 1 book a year kind of thing. The House with the Golden Door by Elliot Harper, the second book in the Wolf Den trilogy. So good. That trilogy is so good. The last book's coming out next year. I'm so excited. In terms of authors, notable authors, I've already mentioned Holly Black. That was the first, Book of Night is the first Holly Black book I've ever read, and she's been someone that I've been wanting to read from for years. She's had so many books over the years that I want to read, and I still want to read quite a few of them. There are some that I'm like, okay, maybe not. V.E. Schwab, I read my first V.E. Schwab and my second V.E. Schwab book this year. That's another author that I've been wanting to read from for years. But I think by far the author that defines this year, or authors I should say, is Christina Lauren. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I read 9 Christina Lauren books this year. I just plowed through most of their work. I mean, that's a lot of Christina Lauren. I didn't realise how much it was. Like, again, I didn't realise that I'd read it all in 1 year. I forgot that I read that on Honeymooners this year because it was so long ago. And again, it was in that beginning of the year period of time where I was loving everything I was reading, and that was one of them that really stuck out to me. Should we talk about my least favourites of the year? This is something I only really started talking about last year because I had a couple stuck out to me, and again I have some that stick out to me this year, but none of them are like offensively bad. It's just compared to the other 97 books I read this year, something about them stuck out to me or annoyed me about saying this, but the first one is Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, and I own Electra. I'm really excited to read Electra. I'm really excited for Atalanta that's come out this year. Ariadne is not a bad book. It's not even like badly written, I wouldn't say. I can't remember. It's been a while. What I remember is I enjoyed it while reading it. I listened to the audiobook and the audiobook was fine. I threw up a Word doc and it all came out. All of the things I didn't agree with, and the more I wrote about it, the more like I went back and referenced the material, the more convinced I was that I was not okay with that decision. But I know that book's super popular, so I'm aware that it might just be me. It's like a matter of principle over anything else. Defy the Night by Bridget Camera. We've talked about Defy the Night by Bridget Camera already in this video. I read the Cursebreakers trilogy by her last year. I really enjoyed it. It wasn't like the best thing I'd ever read, but I had a lot of fun with it. I just found it quite boring. And the characters just frustrated me, and nothing that interesting was happening to keep me reading. Like, I stopped halfway through. I wasn't reading it as quickly as I thought I would, and I wanted to read something else by the end of the month and return back to it. And then after I returned back to it, having read a different book, like, all of the problems were amplified because the book I read in between was amazing. It looks like I'm continuing on with the series because I have it. I'm really bad at DNFing series. I don't like doing it. Speaking of starting series and then not wanting to finish them, Dangerous Remedy by Kat Dunn. Again, like, I can't really remember what my problem was. I remember that, like, one of the main characters gave me big red flag energy. I didn't like what was going on with her. And I think I might have had some similar problems that I did with Defy the Night, where these characters are supposed to be really amazing and capable, and they make these really stupid mistakes or take ages to figure something out. It's so annoying. They lose all their validity. There are parts of it I enjoyed, definitely. Like I said, I by no means hate any of these three books. Should we talk about my favourite poetry, graphic novel, non-fiction quickly, and then we'll get on to honorary mentions, my favourites list. My favourite poetry book I read this year was The Witch Doesn't Burn in This One by Amanda Lovelace. It resonated with me. There are quite a few in here that I really enjoyed. I do love the whole theme of like witches and stuff like that, and like women being sinned, and so this naturally, like, the theme's just cool to me. My favourite graphic novel, I don't know if I can pick like one. Series was a really big thing that defined graphic novels for me this year. My favourite though, I mean, it has to be Saga. I love this series. Like, it's one of my all-time favourites, so naturally, like, it's gonna be my favourite. So well done. If you want to hear more of my thoughts, then I'll link my December wrap-up down below because I go on about it a bit in that one. My favourite non-fiction, Three Women by Lisa Tadeo. I read this again in January, again in that time, and it really stuck out to me. And I just think about it all the time now. I didn't want it ever to end. I thought it was so clever and so well written. Yeah. And now on to honourable mentions. There are two honourable mentions I want to mention quickly. Piranesi versus Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I don't know, it's a difficult one. A lot of people have the same reading taste as me. A lot of their favourite books are also my favourite books. This was like one of their favourites. Whatever reason, it's not to me. So it feels weird. Like, and it felt, when I was reading it felt like it should be one of my favourites. Kind of surprised me. Like, if there was an 11, it would be Piranesi. It's a very strange, beautiful little book. It's very clever. And the second honourable mention is Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. I read this over the summer. I listened to the audiobook, which is narrated by the author herself, and I had such a grand old time. I have rambled on for so long. I think I have like a half hour's worth of footage and I've not even started talking about my favourite books yet. Editing this is gonna be a beast. And finally, let's talk about my favourite books of the year. I read a lot of great books in 2022, but not a lot of like favourite books. At number 10, we have The Project by Courtney Summers. I read two Courtney Summers books this year, but this one, again, I read in February. It's during that time, and reading this, like, the experience of reading this has like wedged itself in my mind. I was obsessed with this. I so vividly remember, like, I went to a meeting type thing and I was all nervous about it and I felt really sick and anxious for the rest of the day. I took a hot chocolate home and I did laundry and I listened to the rest of this book. That's all I did for the rest of the day. I did chores and I listened to the rest of it because I was like so anxious still, and I just loved it. Like, I'm very rarely like scared or like something gets into my skin that much. This did it. There was one scene that made me feel sick to my stomach. I was obsessed. I had so much fun reading this one. I think I give it like a 9 out of 10. Next up is Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl Strayed, the author of Wild. I haven't read Wild yet, but I want to. This It's so lovely. Again, I listened to the audiobook and it's narrated by Shaw herself, and she does such a fantastic job, and it's so nice hearing it come from her mouth. And the stories in here are so endearing and touching, and her advice is like honest. Like, she doesn't beat around the bush, but it's very empathetic. I definitely feel like this is one that like can be reread and reread again. There's a couple stories in here that I don't think I'm ever quite gonna forget about. Sticking to non-fiction, next up is Three Women by Elisa Tadeo. I've already talked about this. It's my favorite non-fiction book I read this year. I just think about the characters and what it represents all the time. So good. So good. I do also want to mention at this point that this order is by no means a hard and fast order. I rearrange it like 1,000 times. I cannot decide. I think my top three are my top three and my bottom three are my bottom three, but this middle section, they could literally be in any other order. Like, I've changed my mind so many times. Next up on this list is Out of Love by Hazel Hayes. This is Hazel Hayes' debut. She is a YouTuber and internet person. Again, narrated by Hazel Hayes, and she does a fantastic job. I really enjoyed it at the time. It almost reminded me of Sally Rooney. I thought it was really well done and just beautifully written. And again, it stuck with me. I think about it a lot now. And I don't know if it's about a breakup, really. That's what it's about. We follow a relationship and we begin with their breakup, and then as the book goes on, we go back to see them when they first meet. And I don't know if it's because I went through a breakup this year after having read it, and like it resonated with me so much more after that, and I think about the opening chapter of this book all the time now. Next up is The Strange the Dreamer duology by Laini Taylor. I don't know if it's my favorite duology. I haven't read a ton. I've read like maybe 6. That's not too bad. The Passenger duology by Alexandra Bracken, Passenger and Wayfarer, that was up until this point my favorite duology, but it's been a really long time since I read it. Like, I read it back in 2016. I read Wayfarer, I think. So I don't know if it is indeed. I do think it is indeed better than Passenger, or if they're equal maybe. It's such a gorgeous duology. Like, individually I gave both of these books 9s out of 10, and together they're just so good. They're so well done. I know I'm saying 2 books in place of 1 book. If I had to pick one, I think Muse of Nightmares is my favorite. I think this one's the stronger book. This is like me trying to do air quotes, but the emotions I felt reading this one, I emoted all over the place. I'm so glad to have read them. The Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy is one of my favourite trilogies, so it's apt that this is now one of my favourite duologies. Next up is The House with the Golden Door by Elodie Harper. I've again already mentioned this. This is the second book in the Wolf Den trilogy. I read the first book last year, and that was on my favourites list last year. The characters are so nuanced and complicated, and it's all about their relationships with each other. Really, that's like what it's about. So clever and thought-provoking, and this took the story definitely in a different direction, but different good. I liked it just as much as I liked the first one. Next up at number 4, we have Carrie Stout is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is Taylor Jenkins Reid's newest novel. I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Daisy Jones the Sixth, and Malibu Rising last year, and Daisy Jones the Sixth is still my favourite of hers. It's still like one of my absolute favourite books, period. I enjoyed this one, and I really didn't think I was going to. I gave it so much slack. Watching Carrie's story play out, I was so wrapped the whole time, and I really started to feel for her. It made me quite emotional at times. I so vividly remember reading the end and just sobbing. I couldn't help it. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I really like what it stands for. I really like the hidden messages in here and about feminine rage and the way we're portrayed. It's so good. We're down to the top 3. Number 3, The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. I really enjoyed this one. It's so clever. It's so well written. The characters are phenomenal. My only criticism really was that I didn't understand what was happening all of the time. I really wanted to reread this one and then read The Atlas Paradox at the end of this year, and I wasn't in the mood when the time came to it. I think I should reread it. I think I would enjoy it a lot more a second time around, and I think it could potentially be a new favourite. I'm very excited for the trilogy. It's hard to fault, really. At number 2, we have The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. This is the book that, like, in October I was like, this is gonna be one of my new all-time favourite books. I loved it so much. I was so in love with it. Not in October, in September, actually, now that I think about it. The only thing is that since finishing it, it's very rare that I actually think about it very often. I think it's because I listened to the audiobook, and the audiobook, like, I felt a bit distanced from some of the characters sometimes. I give it a 10 out of 10, and I'm gonna stand by it for now, because the more I think about it, it is so good. Number 1, is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. My first V.E. Schwab book. It's very well written. My biggest problem I had with it at the time was the pacing and like the layout of it. But I do think about it quite a lot. It was such a beautiful story. It's definitely like I think about the setup of this and the way it ended all the time. It's definitely grown on me as time's gone on. I think I might have like read it in January, maybe February. Writing is gorgeous. The story is so heartfelt and so interesting, and I love everything it stands for with memories and art and ideas. I think I'm gonna bump it up from a 9 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10. I do still kind of agree with those pacing things, but I think The Once and Future Witches and The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue might end up on my all-time favorites list, and probably even the Atlas 6. A lot of my all-time favorite books, like, I've known halfway through, and I did get that feeling with The Once and Future Witches, to be fair, but the Atlas 6 and The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, they needed digesting, and I think they still might need a little more. I would love to reread both of them. Shall we quickly, before we sign off, talk about favorite covers? It's an important subject. Oh, Venus and Aphrodite has a gorgeous cover. I love that one. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, like, I know it's quite minimalist, but I really like it, and the paper's almost shimmery. I really love the cover for Out of Love as well. Piranesi is gorgeous, and like, where is it? Can I show it to you? Where have I put it? In my pile of books. Oh, it's literally at the bottom of the stack. I can't. But when you take the dust jacket off, the naked hardcover is gorgeous, and the end papers have these little seashells and they're so pretty. Book of Night has a really pretty cover, and my edition has like really nice stenciled edges as well. The one that I have to show you, the first one that came to mind, was Gallant by V.E. Schwab, my second V.E. Schwab book. I think this edition is so pretty, and it has like the coolest stenciled edges I think I might have ever seen. Oh, I mean, come on. Look at this. It's a really nice little book. Yeah, I think that's everything I have in this video. It's gotten so dark, it started raining now. January is in full swing. Very excited for what 2023 has to offer. I will definitely film a video talking about anticipated releases and reading goals for the year. It normally doesn't come out until February, so keep your eyes up for that one, and subscribe and hit the bell notification if you're interested in seeing that. Oh, let me know what your favorite books of 2022 were in the comments. I'd love to know. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name's Shade. I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye.